I would like to welcome to the stage our interim leader, Piers Wauchope. Piers.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Welcome to Eastbourne. I know there's much going on at the moment, and am I not on? Sorry? I said no, really. Yeah, well, there we are. So thank you. All right. Well, so start the heckling earlier. I'm here really to explain what's going on, both in my position and historically where we are in this. And it's a difficult time for us. But if I can just start by saying that going back over the years, I've been a great believer in the NEC and what the NEC, the work that the NEC have put in to this party. You'll know throughout the years, the NEC has never been funded, there's never been anything other than volunteers, all of them have been elected by the members, and all of them have really just got rid of a whole lot of their spare time to work hard to make sure that the party is working hard for the rest of us. And if you go back for those years, during the Farage years, there was a very quiet NEC that was really sitting there in awe throughout the proceedings. And I don't say did very little, but certainly didn't offer much of a challenge or much of an alternative view as to what the leader was doing. That really came to an end towards the end of Nigel Farage's years because it was all to do with internal appointments and nothing to do with policy at all, and ended up in the NEC found itself in this grim position of the leader wanting to impose people onto lists. Of course, Nigel Farage chose the MEP lists in 2014, and there was the Welsh list that came up after that, and that's where there was the first ever ruction over that relatively minor, small point. There was then an election when Nigel Farage stepped down, and for the next three leaders, there was very much a Farage influence over each of them. And the first one you remember as being Diane James, who immediately launched into the Farage attack on the NEC. I'm going to abolish it, get rid of it, set up a board of directors or something like that. And she never met the NEC, never had any dealings with any one of us. There was no face-to-face meeting between her and a single member of the NEC. And she then, as you know, resigned very shortly afterwards. There was another election called. It was Paul Nuttall. Paul Nuttall was very much favoured by all of us. And the problem with Paul Nuttall, and this was overwhelming at the time, however much one wanted to protect him, is that the narrative of Paul Nuttall was always fouled from the beginning by what he had placed on his website. And so that any time he wanted to speak about UKIP policy, we never even got there, because people wanted to know, have you really got a PhD? Did you really play for Tranmere Rovers? Were you really at the Hillsborough disaster? Have you got a Victoria Cross? You know, and so it went on and on. It was very, very difficult for that. But the NEC were always very pro Paul Nuttall, and there was no difficulty. It was a great relationship, I think, between the two. He went at a time when it was felt that our fortunes were low. They weren't low in that way. You'll remember the last thing he did was stand for us in the Stoke by-election. He came second. I think it was 27% from memory. The sort of results that we would rejoice over now. But that at the time was looked upon as a failure. And he went. And we came to the next election. And you all remember what happened there. Henry Bolton won, of course. Henry Bolton won, I think, for this reason. Everyone reads the Independence magazine, but it comes with a ballot paper. People want to refer when they're voting, often to people that they don't know and haven't heard of before, and they read through the Independence magazine and see what the individual candidates have to offer. And with Henry Bolton, it seemed he had very much to offer. He was vetted, such vetting as the NEC was capable of beforehand, and he was given a clean bill of health. This was a man with a very impressive CV. But again, when he was elected, and maybe in part I should say elected because a lot of people were frightened of something worse at the time. You can remember the final result in the front two runners. Henry Bolton, again, couldn't get the message out. And he couldn't get the message out because there was always this back narrative that everyone wanted to ask about his marriage, his girlfriend, how many marriages, but what he told his wife, where was she, and all the rest of it. And on top of that, there was the tweets from the new girlfriend that didn't help him either. And the membership were clearly fed up. They lobbied the NEC. All of us on the NEC received, no exaggeration to say, hundreds of emails and pieces of correspondence and phone calls from members saying he's got to go. He's making a laughing stock of the party. Well, the NEC acted on that, and they called an EGM. We all know what happened there. And at the same time, as the EGM, there was a NEC meeting as to what we should do next. And one man stepped forward that everyone approved of, and that's Gerard Batten. And that was great news for the party at the time. And since then, there's no question, Gerard has done great things for us. He was up there at the front. He's worked hard throughout the time. You'll remember that he was interim leader. There was to have been an election. The NEC also perhaps active, I think, in begging people not to stand against him. And he was elected unanimously. He said at the time that I'm only going to stand for a year. I'll be leader for a year, and then I'll put myself forward again for re-election. But at this time, I need to explain my position in this, because at the time of Gerard standing down, I was appointed interim leader. Now, I've sat on the NEC for some 6 years. I've never tried to be anything inside the party other than a member of the NEC in the hope that I could, wherever my opinions are useful, but just to put them forward and give a steer and see if anyone wants to listen. But that's really been my part in this. I've never been, of course, chairman of the NEC or deputy chairman or anything else inside the party other than that. On being made deputy, or interim leader rather, I was, my brief really was just to look after things throughout the election. In a way, I suppose, also of keeping me quiet. I was made returning officer for the election, which means I can't really interfere with the elections or have anything to say on it. So when there was disquiet on the NEC, and there has been disquiet, and there's been disquiet amongst the membership as well, and let's remember that, in that we're not a party of two halves, but we are a party where different people have different views, and that's always been the case in our party. We had a series of resignations because of some of the, I'm just going to say associations, and let me keep everything neutral on this, that Gerard had made. There was an attempt of a no confidence motion in Gerard. We had one member of the NEC resign at that time. We had another one resign after that as well, all for the same sorts of reasons. So there was unease. But the NEC, of course, always being elected from activists, is, in a way, never perfectly, but in a way, representative of the party. And the NEC, throughout all the things the NEC's done over the last 6 years I've been on it, it's been a different NEC, and there have been different people on it. And of those who were on it when I was first elected, there's only one who is still there now, and that's Alan Bowen from Kent. So there are two of us on it that have been, I suppose you could say, long-term, although he's much longer term than I am. And the rest change. Some come back, some go off, some come on, and it's different people. But at all times, an attempt to make it representative, a voice for the membership. And what happened the other day was that there was a NEC motion. It happened after the candidates were to be vetted. They were to be vetted by me as returning officer with a panel of people looking at each of the candidates to ask them, in effect, difficult questions. So if somebody hears candidate A and someone doesn't like candidate A or thinks there's something to be said about candidate A, I'm very happy to put that person on the panel to be able to ask those questions so that a report may be made to the NEC. The vetting was not just a question of successful or not successful and ticking a box. The vetting was simply for questions to be asked, for the person to say or to give an explanation if an explanation was needed, and for me to then speak to the NEC afterwards and say, candidate A, we've spoken to candidate A, he says this, that, or the other, and that's what you've got to consider. So the vetting goes back to the NEC, and at that time there was over Gerard, there was reservations amongst the NEC. I don't say whether they're right or wrong, and that's not my part to say it. All I can say is that, of course, as returning officer, I made the presentation and, of course, couldn't have anything to do with the debate on any of these candidates, and certainly not have anything to do with the voting. And so you've got the NEC acting. A decision was made. It's a decision that some people approve of, some people don't approve of. It could be that one of those bodies is bigger than the other, but again, not for me to say. That's what happened. On the following day, because I was constant telephone calls between me and Gerard, needing to know whether he wanted to stand or didn't want to stand. It was put off to the next day, the NEC having decided that they'd have a vote the next day, but which would have to be done by email. I spoke to Gerard on the Monday afternoon when he told me that he did intend to stand, and it's that time that the email vote went out that had been decided the day before, and the result you all know. Well, that's the position we're in. I'm here as interim leader. I take my instructions, I think it's fair to say, pretty directly from the NEC. They are the ones that decide these things inside the party. I certainly don't say other than this. They were entitled to take a view on what happened. Whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision is not really for me to say, and it's not for me to attack them one way or the other. I just know this, that throughout my time and over the last year, and after what's happened over the last year, I know that Gerard Batten, I very much hope, will always be able to look upon me as both a friend and an admirer for everything that he's achieved in the party and everything perhaps that he'd want to achieve for the party in the future. But we're in this curious position now where we are left with an election. I'm in charge of the election to make sure that the candidates are fair to each other and that people are fair to those candidates. And I can only ask this, that the candidates are going to have to address their views on this. A future leader can change much, and change much within the party. There are also NEC elections coming up at the end of the year, scheduled for November. So there is much to be played for inside the party, and something that will be played for, I very much hope, within the usual constitutional bounds of what happens inside the party. That's my hope and belief. There is nothing worse than a party divided. And when I cast my mind back as to what happened with Henry Bolton, who, if I may say so, was an insignificant man who'd come from nowhere as far as most of us were concerned, and one looks at the extreme damage that was done to this party by the fighting over Henry Bolton. And you'll remember, those of you who went up to Birmingham for the EGM, and the crowds of people that were there, and the people who were holding up, in effect, the old Farage banners of abolish the NEC, get rid of them. We don't want any say. We just want a leader who is completely unfettered by having to listen to anyone within the party at all. And that really was the message that came from the Henry Bolton camp at that time. So I'm interim leader, I hope only until the 10th of August, where I intend to hold a count for the leadership election, and that's the end of me. And I won't do anything drastic, but I certainly won't be interim leader after that. And I very much hope, as I think there's a few words in the programme suggesting this sentiment, that we are going to think very hard about those leadership candidates that we're able to vote for, and to make sure that we make the right choice, because it's going to be a very important time for us in the years ahead. And I just want a quick couple of words about that. We have suffered very badly in recent months. Much and the biggest blow that we received was the rise of the Nigel Farage party that caught the imagination, perhaps mostly of Conservatives, but I think of many people in the country. Just the idea of having this completely clean, so they would think, completely clean, non-political, really, apart from one policy only, and that is the people voted in a referendum, we've got to enforce that referendum. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but that is what caught the spirit of our times, as it were. Just tell those buggers in government who can carry on, you know, being in government, perhaps, but just tell them that we must have this one thing. Well, I think, in my reading of it, although of course one could be very wrong and all sorts of things go wrong in the world, that the new leader of the Conservative Party, and I think we all know who that's going to be, but it would be crazy for him to go back on that. He has got to deliver Brexit. Now, if he doesn't, then the Brexit Party gets a magnificent fillip, and we go on, they go on in strength. We are where we are, but they will go on because of that. If Brexit is delivered, if it does happen, if we are out, as you'll see in recent polls, there was one in the Telegraph the other day, something like 92% of the Brexit Party support will just melt straight away and go back to the Conservative Party. It is an ephemeral, part-time party that is there to deliver one point. If that one thing is delivered, and the Conservatives will know that if they don't deliver it, they are toast, that once it is delivered, we are back looking towards the future. And this party has much to offer. This country needs this party, and will do in the months to come and the years to come, because we speak of things that no one else will touch. And I just give you an example of it, but when you think of the levels of immigration into this country, that the Conservative Party for years has always been saying, oh, this is disgraceful, under Labour, this is disgraceful, we must bring immigration down, and they never have. If anything, it's increased. And when you look at immigration into this country now, that used to be counted in the thousands, it's not even in the thousands or the tens of thousands now. It's in the hundreds of thousands. And if you look at the gross immigration into this country, it works out at something like 1 million every 18 months. It is a massive number. And some of those populations that are going to make things are going to have to be considered in the future. And I just take as an example, as it seems topical at the moment, but the Muslim population in this country, which has increased twice. That is, it has doubled in the last decade, and is expected to double again in the next decade. And nothing to say what's going to happen after that. There are things that have to be considered that only this party can properly consider. And the important thing we're going to have to think of looking to the future is, how do we deliver that? How do we get influence? How do we get traction? How do we present ourselves? And it's that last point, really, that the NEC, in making their decision, were concerned about. How do you present yourself to make yourself more attractive to more people, to more voters, to make sure that you can get across one of your core aims? And it's the delivery of that that's going to be all important to us in the days to come, the months to come, the decades to come perhaps, and it's going to be the thing that's going to be on the mind, I'm sure, of the next leader representing this party. Ladies and gentlemen, all I can say again is welcome to Eastbourne. I know it's been particularly difficult for some of you to come here. Some of you come from much further than the southeast, I know, and some of you must be wondering to yourselves whether you should have come in the first place, given the internal politics of the party at the moment. But I'm really glad to see you here, and let's just hope that after the election, certainly, or up until the election, that things are going to look a whole lot rosier for us, because there's every reason to suppose that they will. So thank you very much.